Hello, Opening Pathways viewers. This is Tom Lenoble. I'm glad to have you with me today, and I'm also excited about my guest, James Wood from Bodark. James, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
I'm thrilled to have you with me. Let's jump right in. I am really interested in hearing what first sparked your idea. What was the first thing that sparked this company of yours, Bodark?
Yeah, I've been working in the enterprise software space for the past 25 years, and I, I got to start, in Big Five Consulting, and it was a very eye-opening experience to be, 22 years old and seeing how these, Fortune 500 companies, operate, and all the challenges and so forth, and getting that view into consulting, it was both exciting and at times frustrating because I felt like, there was so many opportunities to deliver more value to customers. A lot of times, unfortunately, the nasty game of consulting is, measured in terms of how many consultants can we get on the ground and, all the games and, less focus on, business outcomes. And so, my wife and I started Bodark together back in 2006, and we've kind of been on that Don Quixote-esque journey ever since. We're on a mission to optimize, and that was the real spark for us is just having that opportunity to kind of get past all the other stuff and just roll up our sleeves and understand where customers are struggling and see if we can come up with some creative ways to apply technology to solve those problems. And so that's I'm a techie by heart or nerd to hear my wife tell it, and I just enjoyed what I do, and just kind of wanted to be able to have an outlet to really focus those energies.
Tell the viewers what Bodark actually does.
Yeah, so we're really focused on process optimization, and we work with a pretty broad array of technologies. We do a lot of work in and around the SAP and Microsoft ecosystems, but our main I guess differentiating factor is we really try to approach it from a process perspective. So we're not that systems integrator. We're not coming in and doing the big projects. Um, kind of a tortured analogy, I guess, would be almost like a renovation construction company. We're coming in to redo a living room or open up a living space, or try to take some of those pain points out of processes. And it could be modernization, it could be automation, integration, you name it. It kind of takes us a lot of different directions, but we try to be that alternative for customers to really see, how can I get more out of what I already have, and just focus more on the process side.
Excellent, excellent. We're going to let you keep your house, but we're going to renovate a few rooms, right?
Yeah, try not
I
to
want,
knock out any bearing walls.
yeah, there you go, there you go. I want to go back a little bit, and I'm curious, was there something in your upbringing or early role models that shaped how you're leading and what you're doing today?
You know, eh, it's funny. So my brother has forever been in construction, and when I was in high school and college, that was kind of the direction I was headed. Working in summers, building houses, worked for commercial construction companies, and it's a different world, but I got a lot of satisfaction out of actually building something, seeing the results of that. And software is a much more abstract place, but it has some of those same rewarding benefits. And I think that was part of the allure that really drew me to it, and the inspiration, I guess.
Got it, got it. We all have our own leadership styles. I'm wondering if you ever had an experience. Was there something pivotal that revealed what yours is?
Um, yeah, a couple. So it was. I worked for a gentleman. He was ex-military, and he was very disciplined, but he brought a certain amount of energy and fun into work that, when you're a 16, 17-year-old kid, job is a job. And, it's here in Texas where I live, it's 105 degrees outside, and you're just not necessarily seeing the big picture at times. But, in his case, it was it was almost like gamification. Let's figure out how to be 2% better today than we were yesterday or last week, and so it was surprising to see, that you can bring, kind of an energy and a fun to what you're doing, even though, it may be a very mundane thing. It's easy to kind of have that cynical view, but that was really eye-opening for me of, can we create a fun atmosphere where, yeah, some days it might be drudgery, but nevertheless, we can try to find the fun in it and the challenge and push. And so, that was probably the experience that stood out the most. And in his case, he was very much a good example of servant leadership. He was not the kind of leader that would demand a lot and then not be there in the middle of I mean, he was rolling up his sleeves and getting into it as well. And so I've tried to embody some of that, I think, in my leadership style as best I could.
I see. I see. Great. Yeah, our leadership styles are interesting. I love hearing about all of ours, especially those that come from a mindset of service. And I think it's really, really important. Have you ever along the journey doubted your vision? And if you did, how'd you get to the other side?
Sure. Many times, I think I think one of the hard lessons in operating a business is the things that make you good as an individual employee don't necessarily translate to running a business. You can, I think, in a lot of walks of life, you can really apply yourself, spend a lot of time researching, honing your craft, getting better, and you see the direct outcome and results of that versus in this world. I mean, customers have so much choice, and it's so subjective. And, you can put your best foot forward, and we put a ton of energy into this proposal and everything. And, for a variety of reasons, you don't win sometimes, and the reality is you don't particularly bat for a high average in general. And so I think, for me, that was a difficult lesson to really come to grips with is it's not just about hard work. There's a lot of other factors, and you have to be, I think, well-rounded in um, the way that you lead and the way that you put your organization together. And of
Yes.
course, it takes a lot of talented people around you to compliment you where you're weak. And so,
Yes. Yes. It does take others. There's no question about it, the support of others. What's been the biggest turning point for Bodark so far?
I think from a technology standpoint, definitely the cloud. I think the cloud became um, a great equalizer for smaller boutique firms like us to be able to um, compete and scale. I mean, we're certainly never going to compete with Accentures and Deloittes of the world, but we are. We like to say we're small, but we're mighty, and
Yeah.
having access to cloud native technology and kind of the extension that we've seen with low code tooling and now AI empowered development, we're able to do a whole lot more with less and compete in areas that we weren't able to compete before. So yeah, I think for us that was a big inflection point of okay, maybe we can explore some things that we weren't even attempting because we just knew we didn't have the capacity to throw our hat in the ring.
Interesting. What did those early days teach you about trust?
I think it's a trust but verify. That's probably the best way I could describe it. Is there's a certain level of gamesmanship, I suppose, that goes into a lot of these types of opportunities and relationships, and you have to understand what different people's motivations are, and you can drive yourself crazy trying to get yourself in the head of people too much, but I think that was something that I started to realize is it's easy to get myopic and focus on our outcomes, but now we need to look more broadly and how do I help you succeed more, and not necessarily turn this into a zero sum game. And I think that's it's a difficult lesson to to come to grips with. But I think, the more that we approach things with a really thoughtful eye towards different motivations, different factors, I think, it's helped us improve ourselves as far as our offering. I think to be, more than just here's our solution, take it or leave it. It's a more
Yes.
thoughtful process.
Yeah, be more introspective with yourself and a little bit more clear about what the customer's expecting and what their needs are is it really, really
Absolutely.
critical, I think, in the work we do. I talk to people a lot about AI, and in our world today, there's this push-pull going on a bit about AI, and I happen to think AI is not only here to stay, but one of the biggest things that happened in our world in a long time,
Hmm.
and technology is rapidly expanding, and I'm curious how you um, keep up with technology at the same time with looking at sustainability. We have to keep the lights on. How does that work for you and Bodark?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that we try to emphasize is pacing, understanding that things are moving very rapidly and it's easy to get caught in this cycle of chasing, there's this new announcement and we need to go down that rabbit hole. We need to, chase this. You have to keep a finger on that pulse to be sure, but I also think there's, okay, let's take a step back and let's think about, how do we cultivate the right skill sets to work with, whether it's generative AI or something else, that there's just like any sort of, part of computer science, there's all the foundational pieces that lead up to, you know, building that mastery. And I think, we've found over the years that if we cultivate those core skill sets, then it's much easier to take knowledge that we already have and apply it. Here's the next new shiny thing, but there are definitely going to be elements of that we've seen before. And how do we relate and apply that to be able to keep pace? I mean, to your point, it's moving at such a dizzying pace now that
It
it is
is.
hard to keep up. But I think that pace for us has been a really key element to at least get the end of a year. And it's like, okay, I understand more this year than I did the previous
Yeah,
year, and it's a marathon, not a sprint.
it is. It is. And always learning, I hope, anyway. And
Yeah.
when the stakes are high, things are tense, customers want one thing, your team wants another thing. How do you make those hard decisions? What is your process?
We try to take as much of a pragmatic approach as we can. I mean, you go to conferences a lot of times and you leave and it's high energy and you see all the exciting things and you can't wait to get back. And then sometimes you come back to the customer's world and they might be as far as 10 years away from where that technology is. I mean, they're running legacy systems and this and that. And so I think for us, it's been an exercise in trying to stay grounded and understand where customers are and really think about the roadmap of, how do we get from where we are and have some incremental wins along the way versus I think there's always that tendency to just, let's rip all the other stuff out and replace it. And, that's easy to wrap your head around from a tech perspective, but maybe not so much from a business perspective. And, there is is the juice worth the squeeze conversation to be had in a lot of these topics. And yeah, it's having that balance, I think is important because, as much as we live in the technology space, at the end of the day, it really is about business outcomes.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm curious about your team and how you keep them motivated and anchored to your values and manage through when they don't agree with you.
Yeah, well, first of all, we've been incredibly fortunate to have just an uncanny collection of individuals that have come in. I've worked in a lot of places, and I can say brag on my team, I suppose, but a willingness to check egos at the door and just collaborate. There's not that knowledge hoarding and strife going on, and so I think because we've had those, we've been fortunate to have those right-minded individuals come into the organization. It has helped almost without any input from us,
Yeah,
have that, culture spread, throughout the organization. And, I think personally, I mean, just from a leadership perspective, I mean, I always entertain and encourage people. I do want you to challenge me. We do have a
good.
certain way of doing things, and sometimes, if deadlines are here, then sometimes that has to win out. But I think it's healthy for organizations to be constantly questioning, why do we do it that way? Well, that's a good question. Maybe we should rethink that, and I think that, has also created for, we have our team is comes from very different backgrounds, and that diversity, I think, does keep it entertaining because, you have a lot of passionate technical people that like to talk about this stuff, and probably could talk about it all day if we let ourselves.
Yes.
But I think that that's something that keeps it fresh and keeps it fun.
Yeah, I think I hear you talking about that success, and I put my HR people hat on, and my first thing that comes to my mind when you have those results is that you're doing something really well in the hiring process. What do you think your secret is?
Um, yeah, I think for better or for worse, I mean, we are honest to a fault, and so we really do try to paint a picture of, you know you spend more time at work than you pretty much do anything else in your entire life. So we want you to enjoy your work. I think it's important that it's easy in consulting to kind of, okay, this consultant over here has a skill set, let's just maximize that as much as possible, put them on the same projects, try to squeeze as much revenue. That to me is a very short-sighted endeavor. I want you, if you have a new passion, we might not be able to pull the trigger today, but can we find, a way to work together to get you where you want to be? Because if you're excited to get out of bed, I mean, that's a win for Team Bodark. The more passion that you're putting into your day-to-day activities, it's just, it helps everyone. And so, we've tried to, I think, just lay it out as plainly as possible. This is what we are. We would love for you to, come join us on our crazy journey. But we also understand that, you're an individual, you have your own goals. And so, can we just keep that open dialogue to find, let's make sure that we're together on the same path. And if ever we wake up one day and we're not, then, I'm sad to see you go, but I understand, that you know, you got to do what's best for you and your family.
Yes.
And so, we've always just tried to keep that honest dialogue and see where it goes. And, we've been pretty fortunate that, our team has, kind of ridden along with, I
Yes.
suppose.
Yeah, listen up, viewers. You might want to rewind 30 seconds. There was a lot of wisdom in that last question and answer. What's your boldest vision for the next 5 years?
Boldest vision that is, well, I think for one thing, we're looking to, we went to market last year with a new service offering that we call Lighthouse that we're really excited about. It is more of a managed services style, all you can eat buffet, if you will, of software services. And yeah, I think one thing we found is that, nowadays it's whether we're brought in to build an app or, some sort of automation or a dashboard or you name it, there's more of like a SaaSification, I suppose, of a lot of these projects where, it's we don't just need you to build it, we need you to support it. We're gonna, have a long-term roadmap of how we're gonna extend it and expand it. And so, you know, I think we've seen value from our perspective of being on the ground with customers just in terms of economies of scale. The more we understand your business, the more that we can be out there and, hopefully proactively finding solutions to problems and things like that. And so, that's I think our bold vision is to really, see where how far we can take this lighthouse concept because it's not for everyone. But if we can find, those um, customers that really do have, I mean, it feels like every customer we talk to, they have this backlog of things they just never quite get to, and if we can make a dent in that, then I think, that is about as transformational a thing as we've been able to bring to market.
If resources weren't a constraint, what wild idea would you chase?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that we've wanted to build in the product space, and I think, if we didn't have those resource constraints, uh, our team is really at their best when they're just, really able to collaborate and build a solution. And I'm not sure precisely what that solution would be, but I think those magical times you see where those creative juices are really flowing, and if there is no time and budget constraint, then we can go past where I think a lot of times the bar is, on typical consulting projects of, let's just get something that's working and get into production and move on versus, what if we could really push the innovation envelope? And so, yeah, for us, that would be
Yeah,
the
it's
big
great idea to listen to, right? If I had all the resources I wanted, what would I do with it? Where would
right.
I go? So I'm curious, James, what are you most hopeful about in the world today?
Um, I guess as it relates to AI, mean, there's a lot of doomsday conversation going on. I'm certainly no economist, but I think history has shown us that these types of technical innovations have a tendency to create more opportunities than they take away. And certainly there's a transition period, and um, I am bullish on this technology, maybe ever the optimist, but I do think there is a real possibility as long as we're careful and thoughtful, I guess, as a human
Yes.
civilization, as far as the ethics around it, that this is a technology that can really make an impact in the world in ways that we've just never seen. There's so many applications. I mean, you read about it all the time, and just crazy stuff that we just wouldn't have even tried or
Wouldn't have
attempted,
thought of exactly.
even 5 years
Yeah,
ago, versus now. And
exactly.
so I'm optimistic, I guess, cautiously optimistic on that. Really, I can only imagine what my kids and my grandkids, what their lives would look like
Yeah,
25, 50 years. Yeah.
I read an article today and it was interesting, controversial for sure, but it's an application of AI. I think it's called Wobot, and it works with children, and it's not therapy, but it's helping children in those ages post-COVID where that teenager that's a little harder to talk to parents and disclose things, and they work with it, and a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists have worked with them, so it knows when to say you need to talk to a person, not me. And the
Right.
results of it were really impressive. It got my attention, and it's one of those areas again that can be really controversial. But I think, like you said, we haven't even probably scratched the surface of what we're going to see from AI. Definitely one of the biggest things in life in a long time. I'm curious, and I know my viewers will be. What advice do you wish every emerging leader or new founder could hear?
Um, I think there's definitely an element of I'll tell you, at least from my perspective, when I was younger, I always felt like, somebody out there had the answer, and I just couldn't find that person. The whatever problem it was I was dealing with, that there was a magic answer. And I think while, getting outside advice and consulting and all of that is a very good thing, I think just trusting in your instincts and recognizing that the answer for your organization just may be somewhat unique and somewhat different is is a very valuable thing to come to grips with when you're starting a new enterprise, and just
Yes.
I think a lot of the successful ones you've seen out there, they didn't try to replicate. They said, all right, just almost tunnel vision to the point of, let's just figure out what is the best and most optimal way for us to build every corner of our organization. And I think that's I mean, you see it with companies like Amazon that have had just tremendous success. Uh, it takes a lot of you know courage, I think, to head
Yes.
in that direction. But I think that's good advice, I would say.
Yes, thank you. It's great wisdom. I know I work with a lot of people and I see it get right to the edge, and it's that point where you want to give up, or you want to turn back, or you want to completely not just pivot, but completely redo, and you're right on the edge and hanging in there. It's a theme I hear a lot, and I know I experience a lot. I have a final question for you. I'm curious if your younger self were watching this recording, what would you say to them?
Mm, that's a good question. Yeah, I think maybe just a word of encouragement to any of these journeys, whether you're starting a software consulting business or anything else. I mean, that there is no deterministic path, and there's not a shot clock on this thing, and so enjoy the journey, recognize that, it's going to go somewhere, and it may not be at the pace that you want, and it might not necessarily be, the outcome might at the end may not be what you thought it was going to be at the start, but it's going to be rewarding regardless. And it's easy to worry along the way, and probably even healthy to some extent, just for but at the same time, just it's cliche, but I suppose trust the process.
Yes,
You're putting in work, you're getting better each day. Who knows where we'll be 5, 10 years from now, but it's going to work out.
yes, yes. Some of my most nightmarish mistakes have turned into my best opportunities. That's what I've learned is if I can just be open to that possibility. James Wood
Yeah.
from Bodark, it's great to have you with me today. One final statement about Bodark you'd like the viewers to know?
Um, just, we love tackling hard problems, and so, always welcome questions. And, if we're a fit, then we can help an organization, great. If not, we just appreciate the dialogue. And so, yeah, we'll appreciate any sort of questions sent our way.
Great. James, thank you for being with me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to my viewers, we'll see you the next time on Opening Pathways.